Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. If you're new to my live streams, we have these regularly, and in the final part of the live stream, I open the space up for the community for any participation or questions as well. Tonight, we have a very interesting live stream. Firstly, the developments. The ceasefire officially ended. Well, the first part of that ceasefire. In Israel, they're saying that, the ceasefire ended now, and we need something to continue down the ceasefire. And there's something called the initiative of Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff said that, we have to continue temporarily for Ramadan and also for the period of Eid, during which, the Palestinians, they need to release some more alive and dead Israeli prisoners of war in exchange for more Palestinians being released by Israel. Israel is going out claiming that, sure, we accept the agreement. On the other hand, however, we accept the agreement with conditions, by the way, with additional conditions, which are completely disarming the Palestinian resistance. Hamas, from their end, we're not there. We're not even talking, because this is not what we agreed on. Egypt is confirming that that's true. No, we're talking about a three-phase agreement. Today, the Egyptian foreign minister, he said that, yes, we were talking about a three-phase agreement. This is not like one phase and that's it, and then an extension or whatever. And Hamas seemed confident that they can continue and apply more pressure on Israel to continue down the ceasefire agreement, although it appears that despite Israeli breaches, Israel had an attack in a drone in North Gaza, an area called Beit Hanun. Reports that there were martyrs and people wounded. And also they said that we're no longer getting aid into Gaza now. So Israel's treating this as, no more ceasefire agreement. Moves from Benjamin Netanyahu. We've been talking about these moves from Benjamin Netanyahu and the actions that he takes to please the bloodthirsty allies of his. They thrive on the bloodlust of the Palestinian people, of the innocent people, and he wants to give them a bit of blood to make them go quiet a little bit before he continues with the ceasefire agreement. This is what we're seeing at the moment. Now, in Israel itself, this is where the big problem lies, inside of Israel. And, mainstream media doesn't talk about this like they weren't talking about the feuds and infighting and inner war and almost coups that happened in Israel since the beginning of the genocide. Israel was so split from a political level, from a military level, intelligence level, and from a population level, from a societal level from the beginning, that it was a perfect recipe for someone to come in and have a military coup in the country. I mean, if the Western countries that supported, or Western establishments that supported Israel, viewed what's happening in another country, they would be sending their armies there to have a military coup, because, the people don't like the man. And guess what? Some people in the military and security, they don't like him too. So let's go and have a coup. However, they cover all of these things up to whitewash their little genocidal ally and continue to support them. What is the latest with these divisions? What's the latest between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his senior figures in the government? Well, there was a report in the Israeli channel 13, and we'll get into more interesting details in this live stream. This report here. Netanyahu met with the representative, the head of the Shin Bet or Shabak, Ronen Bar, who he put aside from the negotiations. He's no longer going in negotiating, although he took part for the past 15 months. And the representative of the Israeli army in the negotiating delegation, he had a meeting with them. He had a meeting and they were discussing the potential and the prospect about going into phase 2 and how we would go. And during that interview, again, infighting, shouting and blaming, you're ignorant, you're this, you're that. In previous infighting in Israel, they almost had literally, things thrown at each other and swear words and what have you. But today, no, it was also serious. So What is Netanyahu and Dermer was there too? What were they saying? They were saying, yeah, no way we're going to accept Hamas. They are the ones who carried out the 7th of October. There's no way we're going to accept them, remaining there or keeping their arms. The head of the Shin Bet Ronen Bar said, we can't force them to give up their arms. It doesn't look like this formula is going to work now. And we're going to have to give in now, because guess what? Donald Trump himself, he said that we can continue down the war afterwards. So what's the problem? Let's accept now this agreement, continue with them, and then if we feel like there's a need to go back to the war, we'll go back to the war. However, what's most important now is to get the people back, is to get the Israelis back alive at least, because we're risking them dying. And Netanyahu responded saying, I don't understand that this ignorance. He used a very derogatory word in Hebrew, borut or bor, very ignorant, blaming the Israeli head of the Shin Bet. Netanyahu's disregard and disrespect for the senior figures in the Israeli military and security establishment have been a theme during this genocide, and he was always putting them down, being condescending and being disrespectful for them. Today, that was another case. But the more interesting thing came from the representative of the Israeli army in the negotiating delegation. He said something very interesting. He said that the Americans are deceiving us by giving information to Egypt and the media and the other mediators that they're not giving us. The Americans are telling the mediators, we're going to apply pressure on Israel to go into phase 2. And to us, they're coming to say, oh yeah, you have a free hand, you can do whatever you want. That made pro-American Ron Dermer, American at the end of the day, and Netanyahu become even more outrageous, and they started to have more confrontational tones with the representative of the Israeli army, just because he suggested that the United States administration is deceiving Israel because of the information that they're giving them, which contradicts the information that they're giving Egypt and Qatar. Is this something new? No, it's not something new. These things happened before, and as a matter of fact, some analysts in Israel believe that Benjamin Netanyahu serves more American interests than he does Israeli interests. There is a growing notion inside, from parts of the people and the military establishment and the security establishment in Israel, who believe that they should be liberated from the United States influence. And Benjamin Netanyahu is not working for the favor of Israel, whether when it comes to the decisions of peace or the decisions of war. There are some people in Israel who believe that the United States had some involvement in the assassination of the previous Israeli Prime Minister Rabin, when he wanted to achieve peace, not only between the Palestinians, but also between the Syrians as well. He was assassinated. And Benjamin Netanyahu was on the other camp that was calling for the assassination of that prime minister. So this is not something new. But what's new about this is that more things are being published about the United States hypocrisy and double standards, and them telling Israel one thing and telling the mediators something else. And this is being published on Israeli mainstream media, although mainstream media that is not very aligned with Benjamin Netanyahu. Which leads us to the following thing that I wanted to talk to you about. And then, of course, we will speak about the prospect of what can happen potentially in the next few days. We spoke about the report of the inquiry that the Israeli army had about the 7th of October, and calling it a massive failure, total collapse of the security and military establishments in the first several hours, the collapse of the Gaza division in the first 2 hours. And more analysts are talking about exactly what happened and where the problems lied, at least in relation to the intelligence side. What happened exactly with the Israeli intelligence? case of uh, our own mistakes only? Was there something from the other side that made it more difficult for us? What exactly was the case? And during this analysis, it wasn't only the report, it was also information that came from Israeli analysts about the failure, about the massive failure from Israel on the 7th of October and following the 7th of October. And during several reports, multiple analysts in Israel were saying that it's as if we were completely blind. It's as if we were completely blind despite the warnings that we had, despite all of the technology that we use, unprecedented technology, despite the wall that they built around Gaza with all of these sensors costing over 1 billion just several years back, despite the fact that Gaza is recorded almost by the second. What did you feel? How did we feel? One of the senior military analysts in Israel, he said that there's a big problem in understanding the communication of the leaders of Hamas. Why? Because in 80% of the conversations between the leaders of the military wing of Hamas and also the political wing of Hamas, they are quoting Quranic verses. And those who don't understand these verses, they can't really get a grasp what's being said exactly in that conversation. So I'm talking to you and then I'm quoting a certain verse, and then, we understand what the interpretation means, this code language. And that was a big part of the failure. The second part is, and that part actually was published on the Israeli Channel 12, is during the past 15 years, to be more accurate, after Hamas came to power inside of Gaza, well, one report said on Israeli Channel 12, based on sources in that community, that the Israeli Military Intelligence Directorate, or Aman in Hebrew, they failed to recruit anyone in Gaza. They failed to recruit even one operative. Now, that's not all of the Israeli intelligence community, like the Shin Bet or any other intelligence, but that's specifically the Israeli Military Intelligence Directorate. And they have to have operatives, by the way, and they work in line with, side by side with other intelligence agencies inside of Israel. They said we couldn't recruit one person in 15 years, coinciding with the rise of Hamas. And 15 years is approximately the time where the previous leader of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, was controlling the movement. What is the link between the two? Well, Sinwar, before he was arrested, he was leading a movement in parts of Palestine called Majd. And that part of Hamas, they were focusing on hunting down anyone who collaborates with Israel. And they were very fierce with anyone who operates with Israel. When he came to Gaza, that started to be the mainstream thing. That's like normal. Anyone who even dares to deal with Israel, this is what's going to happen to them. What was the action? What was the main action that came following this? It came in the form of deception from the Palestinian resistance by having its own operatives who weren't well known, pretending to be operatives for Israel or pretending to want to work with Israel in return for, money or whatever. Therefore, dealing with Israel, getting more knowledge, apart from their technological and hacking skills that we saw not only in the past year, but in the past decade, they were working with them and they were giving them false information about the Palestinian resistance that could be deemed as accurate. However, they were only misleading them. And that was something that contributed to the massive Israeli failure on the 7th of October and following the 7th of October. Even during the genocide, when Israel was conducting a genocide, over 60,000 people martyred, thousands not found, over 150,000 wounded, total destruction. They failed miserably in splitting the society in Gaza, affecting the social cohesion, because the Palestinian resistance would have found it more difficult to operate if there was a hostile environment. Israel tried to create a hostile environment, especially through the aid, through something that the people need so much, by not allowing aid in, and then potentially trying to deal with certain criminal movements inside of Gaza to spread this aid to the public, which of course was met with fierce resistance from the majority of the population and movements and leaders inside of Gaza. And then after the ceasefire began, and even before the ceasefire began, the security side of the Hamas government inside of Gaza started to take severe action against them, in many cases offensives where people were killed as well. So this is the second part that we were talking about. Now we want to try and understand what's going to happen then. Everyone is interested to know what is going to happen. Are we going to see a full-scale war? Is it going to escalate? Is Netanyahu going to go and sit down and do another U-turn like the U-turns that he's done before? Well, there are many reasons to believe that this ceasefire agreement that we have inside of Gaza is a ceasefire agreement that forces Israel to continue down the path of the ceasefire, with, of course, breaches, with problems. That's natural, because you're talking about a state that was established on these horrors. But this agreement forces Israel to continue. Clearly, we've seen that phase 1 ended. There's phase 2. There are breaches, and there have been breaches during the ceasefire too. But in Israel, there are no indications that they are planning for a full-scale operation inside of Gaza. They only have 2 divisions outside. They have more divisions in Lebanon, more special forces in Syria than they do in Gaza. There are no immediate orders for the Israeli army to prepare to go into Gaza. There are only orders from the Israeli Defense Minister Katz, the newly appointed defense minister, to tell the Israeli army prepare in case we need to go on an offensive. However, the talk in the Israeli mainstream media is about potentially having airstrike. I mean, the recent breach that they had was through a drone, not even their air force. Again, we can't really be sure if that's related to any clauses in the ceasefire agreement that hasn't been made public. But slowly, Egypt is now confirming, no, we are indeed talking about a 3-phase ceasefire agreement. Slowly, they're revealing more things. Now, on the other hand, it's still Israel, it's still the same country that committed and commits a genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the West Bank, draconian apartheid state, and having aggressions against Lebanon, against Syria, not keeping it a secret that they are an expansionist entity, trying to normalize this expansionism through many falsehoods. So there could be a problem, but that sits with the same notion that we spoke about from the beginning of this war, which is, well, I was asked in many cases by the community, like, where do you see this going? I mean, what do you think is going to escalate, or are we going to ceasefire? Is it going to be peace? Are we going to have 2 states or whatever? And my answer from the beginning, from over a year ago, is still relevant today, which is either the war will continue and expand further, or there will be a de-escalation that will be on very high heat, very, very tense, up until we reach a stage where this actual de-escalation will break and things will go up in flames again. Because it does not look like there's anything that can be resolved here with the existence of the state of Israel in the form in which it exists and has existed since its inception. Is there a formula that can be, done? Can the Israeli leaders or someone collapsing Netanyahu and coming back again, can they come up with this new formula that is willing to live with others, that is willing to accept that there are Palestinian people and they need a state? We need to concede, they need to concede, let's find some sort of an agreement? Unlikely. Israel is passing laws. They passed a law during this genocide, which passed with over 90% majority vote. We refuse the establishment of a Palestinian state, end of, period. Whether it's led by Hamas or it's led by the Palestinian Authority or it's led by anyone. We refuse the establishment of a Palestinian state. And what they push for is a propaganda of denial, of denying the existence of the Palestinian people as a people. How ironic. The people who came from Ukraine and Belarus and Russia and other parts of Europe and the world and changed their names and created this new false nationality are telling the natives of the land, no, you actually don't exist. We are the real people. We are the true ones. Again, defying history, going against the whole history, even of the Jewish people inside of Palestine who were in Palestine the whole time, up until this Zionist ideology came to Palestine and started to impose this terror inside of Palestine and expansionism and ethnic cleansing and so many problems. So the current short term, there are reasons to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu might do another U-turn. What are the indications for that? Well, Donald Trump, there was a report that he will be meeting families of the Israelis who were released and some of the actual Israelis who were released from Gaza. Why is that important? Well, that's important because some of those who were released from Gaza refused to meet Benjamin Netanyahu. Some of them released videos of them criticizing him when they were in Gaza. Of course, Israel said, oh, it was made up. Well, why didn't you go and hug him after he went out? The majority of them, hardly anyone saw Benjamin Netanyahu. Their families, they say Benjamin Netanyahu is a killer. He killed some of those who went out dead by the confirmations of those who were released, confirmations from the IDF, and Yoav Gallant himself, who said we implemented the Hannibal Directive inside of Gaza. So Donald Trump, in effect, is meeting, or is about to meet, according to reports, people who are hostile to Benjamin Netanyahu. So on one hand, he's acting like his servant when he goes to the United States. And yes, you can go ahead and do whatever you want. But on the other hand, well, he's meeting those who are calling him a criminal, a murderer, mass murderer. And these people have been having mass protests inside of Israel. Again, protests that are not really spoken about that much in mainstream media. In Israel, there were 70 protests, 70 locations that had protests in the past couple of days, with hundreds of thousands of people asking for a completion, a continuation of the ceasefire agreement. Where was the mainstream media from these scenes? Where was the mainstream media and Western politicians who are still aligned with Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu from the popular demand of many in Israel? Of course, we can't be conclusive, to stop the war. To reach a ceasefire agreement, to a level where they started listening to the leaders of the resistance rather than their own leaders, saying that we trust them more than we trust Benjamin Netanyahu, because this man lies more than he breathes. Where were they? So Donald Trump is meeting with these people who have, in the protests in Israel, they will raise banners asking for help from the American administration, not from the Israeli administration. They've lost faith in Israel, by the way. They thought that they can have some sort of faith in figures in the government. It was previously Yoav Gallant and those who are negotiating, who accepted the ceasefire over a year ago that Benjamin Netanyahu refused multiple times. They thought that they can have some sort of faith in them, only for them to see them going away like flies, resignations, or Netanyahu putting them aside. And the man is continuing down this one-person control, dictatorship, absolute dictatorship approach. This meeting shows that, well, Trump, although he's giving these signals to Benjamin Netanyahu, he might actually be pushing for a continuation alongside Steve Witkoff. And they temporarily told Benjamin Netanyahu, look, we'll come up with this offer to try and see if it works with Hamas. And on the other hand, Hamas, what they received instead from Hamas is Hamas telling them, I'm not in the negotiations. They are not in the negotiations. That's number one. Number two, adding more conditions, especially with the way that the Israeli prisoners of war are being released. Why? Because Benjamin Netanyahu had so many delays. Previously, he refused to release Palestinians after Israelis were released. And Hamas told them those days are over. So if we go on to phase two, you will no longer be receiving, I mean, they haven't said that explicitly, but we saw that happening when the bodies were released just a few days ago. But this would be one of the things that Hamas is projected to ask Israel for, because they haven't really released that much, but this is what we understand from the notion. So it's going to be more difficult on Israel in phase two, simply because of Benjamin Netanyahu's arrogance that led to nothing but making it more difficult, because he made the U-turns eventually. And of course, the Israeli population is seeing this, and the global population is seeing this as well. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you in this live stream. Let me open the space up for the community. I'll take some of your questions and comments as well, if you wouldn't mind highlighting them with the time that we have left. And welcome again, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. And thank you so much for tuning in. Solid Crusader is back, is saying, Salam alaikum wa alaikum assalam, my friend Ramadan Kareem. Thank you to you too, my friend. I just checked, and it looks like the part I said run by deranged Netanyahu stopped aid as usual. That is true. Yes, they stopped the aid. Are there enough food and water saved for civilians to get through their days ahead? Yeah, I believe so. I mean, of course, you have to get more aid. But since the beginning of the ceasefire, actually, the numbers of aid trucks, and despite there being breaches on other aspects of aid, like medical equipment, heavy equipment, tents, temporary housing, with the aid trucks, the Palestinians managed to get in more than what was agreed upon in the ceasefire agreement. I'm talking about food, basically, basic stuff to live. So in many cases, you had 1,000 trucks going in one day. Before the 7th of October, the average daily rate of trucks going into Gaza was about 500. Israel, in many cases, stopped it completely. Sometimes just a couple of dozens of trucks used to get in. But they did have sufficient levels of at least food to get them. But again, that's the bare minimum of people who have been facing a genocide. It's not enough, and it's problematic. And it needs a solution. And also MCFC, thank you so much for that. He said, what's your opinion on Rachel Corrie? Rachel Corrie is a typical example. I actually watched a theater that was based on Rachel Corrie's story about maybe it was less than 20 years ago. That was a replay of how things happen. Rachel Corrie resembles and represents the global humanitarian support for the Palestinian cause from anyone, really. She's an American young woman who saw what was happening in Rafah. It was at that time, and she was standing in front of an Israeli bulldozer, and that Israeli bulldozer ran over her alive, and it killed her. And there was hardly any response from the United States. The Bush administration at the time, they tried to hide it they had this old war in Iraq at the time. And she represents the purity of the people from any international country who support the Palestinian people, and the bravery of these people, and the fact that these people are willing to sacrifice with their lives. someone willing to sacrifice with his life, and they're not related to that land or those people. I mean, at least by race or religion, for example, or nationality, going there and putting their life. And we've seen that happening now, right? Israel killed a U.S. protester in the West Bank, right? Aaron Bushnell set himself alight. Not that we, support any of these actions. No, I think, no, you should not really do such things. But that represents the level of frustration. And the man was armed forces. That shows you the actual feeling and the rage of many people abroad, and in particular, there's something very particular about the United States, not to undermine anything in any global country, show the true nature of the population who care so much in defiance of their government and their establishment. And all we can say is, these people are a ray of hope. They are hope to the future of humanity. And they show that, no, the Palestinian people are not on their own, and they have a lot of support from countries abroad as well. Let's go to your next question. Let's put this here quickly. Okay. And also, Just Pudding as well. Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you so much. Much love, my friend. And also, sorry if I'm missing someone who sent any super. And MCFC, thank you so much again, my friend. Much appreciated. Okay. Liba the Great, do you think it's possible Trump wants to give Netanyahu enough rope to hang himself after the genocide? Saudi normalization can't happen while Netanyahu is in charge. Look, one thing about Donald Trump that everyone needs to understand: Donald Trump is a man who tries to he deliberately acts in unpredictable ways, and we saw that evident in the past few days, how he spoke with Zelensky. Not that we didn't know that he didn't like Zelensky, but the manner that he behaves in. He tries to portray himself, and he does certain things to be a person who is difficult to read. And he uses that to his advantage. For example, when Witkoff forced Netanyahu to go into phase 2, or when Witkoff had the conversation with Netanyahu to push him to go into, the ceasefire agreement anyway, he told him the hell that Donald Trump was speaking about includes Israel. Why did he say that? And did it come out of his own accord? No, it didn't come out of his own accord. It came by Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he posted a video before the ceasefire took place of Jeffrey Sachs calling Netanyahu a son of a bee, right? Don't forget that. Does it mean that Donald Trump is this genius, clever man who is? No. But Donald Trump made statements and certain moves that are absolutely abhorrent and racist. There is no denying. But with the moves that he's having with Israel, well, some people in Israel believe that. And that's why there are certain calls to detach to a level from the United States. However, the United States is there, and of course we have the lobby and the influence, and that's all known. But Israel as a state, this is what people need to understand, they weren't made to be a peaceful, harmonious, integrated part of this region, this beacon of democracy and hope and freedom and liberty. It wasn't made by, it was made for there to be a front for Western establishments as a neo-colonialist, expansionist entity that would serve the military-industrial complex, wreak havoc, chaos, and waste taxpayers' money on arms. What did Israel do in the past genocide? They emptied out the stocks from the 70s of all of the bombs, including new ones, of course. And now the new supplies are coming from the United States of America. And of course, the US has plans to, with them and with the lobby, to have Israel as the hub in the West Asian region to export tech, energy, everything. And of course, prevent any revival in the Arab states, prevent any genuine moves to have democracy in Arab states. People need to remember the United States and many Western establishments, they worked against many democratic attempts in Arab states. And Israel is sitting there doing everyone a favor for their patrons. That, oh, I'm here anyway. Do you know what I mean? I'm here anyway. I can escalate. I can go through a war, but they're not there to have peace. Now, they're eventually doomed. Israel is just buying time. This is what people need to know. Israel is only buying time. They have been buying time for a long time, but now they're on a frenzy of buying more and more time very quickly. Donald Trump, by what he's doing to them, yeah, it's like giving someone who is an addict killing himself more drugs, you know, a racist psychopath who's a lunatic maniac, more and more and more and more up until you kill yourself. And Saudi normalization, with their stupidity and arrogance, I think they are ruining the prospect of Saudi normalization, despite the fact that we all know the approach of Saudi Arabia and their position and you know, their mouthpieces in the media and all of that. But Netanyahu was just telling them, oh, you can have Palestine in your territories. I mean, him and Trump are doing everyone a favor. They're leaving no doubt. Netanyahu is exposing Israel for its true nature, for what it is. And Trump is now showing, yeah, exactly, this is what we're doing too. So that if anyone had any doubts, no, please don't have any doubts. And look what I do to my ally. Look what I do to Zelensky. Look what I do to the Ukrainian people who I pushed as a front for a proxy war. And then when the time is not suitable, I give them up. That's it. And I humiliate their president on live television. In no defense of Zelensky, by the way. Zelensky supported the genocide in Gaza. Zelensky stood with Israel against the Palestinians. Let's not forget that. But the way Trump was behaving with him was a message to everyone. I mean, even in Israel, people are saying, we need to take that as a lesson. Because, you know, if tomorrow they might want to do something, we're going to be in very, very big trouble. And thank you for that. And Alan Marwin as well, thank you. Let's go to your next question. TMZBG, which nations and the resistance fronts have said they would react if Israel goes back to Gaza and tries to ethnically cleanse, and what treaties do they have in case they go to war? Well, there were two relevant statements to your question. The first statement that is beyond any doubt, very clear, was from Yemen, from Ansarullah, or what's known as the Houthis in Yemen, who said that, they continuously attacked Israel up until the ceasefire literally took effect. That's number one. Secondly, they said we will be monitoring every move in the ceasefire, and if the ceasefire is broken, then we will attack Israel. But there's something else that they used to say before that could indicate that they might participate before a ceasefire is broken. What was it? Well, they used to say that we will continue our attacks up until Israel stops the genocide in Gaza and lifts the siege of Gaza. If Israel is viewed as repeatedly blocking aid, that could be a sufficient reason for Ansarullah in Yemen to attack Israel again. So there could be an escalation from Ansarullah without a blatant breach of the ceasefire militarily. That could be a thing, but that's my analysis. That's not like to say that they will. But they were very clear, if Israel breaches ceasefire, will go back to attacking, and they're prepared, and they're having military drills and lots of preparations. And the second potential is Iran, because Iran, they have a pending response. The the leaders of the IRGC, they said multiple times, and recently they've had more statements that True Promise 3 will come at the right time. But the most relevant and telling response was from the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who said, if Israel stops massacring children, we might, evaluate or reevaluate the intensity of our response. He did not rule out that they will be responding, but he said, we will reevaluate, our response. However, if they continue, they said after there was no ceasefire before the ceasefire took effect, that it will be bigger than all of the previous responses. However, the first front to be activated will be the Yemeni front if there is a blatant breach in the ceasefire agreement. And then potentially, Iran too. And thank you for that. And Khaled is saying, what do you think any chances Hezbollah, Ansarullah, Iran, Egypt could all attack Israel together, especially if this lack of ceasefire by Israel causes too much more suffering? Well, I would say to that the past 15 months showed that so many things that many people deemed to be impossible were possible. And one of them was what is called the resistance fronts. There was never a case of this type of attack on Israel, these types of attacks on Israel, despite the initiative being taken by the weakest, the front that's considered to be the least equipped, not the weakest, the least equipped, physically equipped, which is Gaza. They started it, they didn't say, they didn't tell their others, but they started to participate. And the more Israel escalated, the more they participated. Hezbollah participated on the second day, Ansarullah very shortly after, Iran. I was personally surprised by Iran, by the way, that they would actually go and attack Israel. Despite all of the, downplaying from those who, hate Iran and for any reason, really, they had attacks on Israel. And guess what? The first attack was a very large attack, an unprecedented attack. And the second attack was the biggest missile effect attack on Israel, not quantity, because, their missiles are huge. The biggest in number all at once was Hamas. Still, they hold that record. 5,000 on the 7th of October. And Hamas were the first movement out of the resistance fronts to attack Tel Aviv as well, by the way. The first country to attack Tel Aviv by missiles was Iraq during the era of Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War. So in many cases, the Palestinian resistance led many things that were strategic, very, very strategic, equation-changing moves. Now, that front that was active for that long showed that, hold on a second, it's possible to attack them, and it's possible also to counter any threats coming from the United States. And if Israel is a paper tiger, then the United States is a paper elephant. Why? Because Ansarullah in Yemen, the Houthis, they expelled 4 aircraft carriers, nuclear aircraft carriers. They expelled them from the Red Sea. Everyone is looking. Egypt is looking. Turkey is looking. All of them are looking. And we're talking about countries who are not interested in war. Egypt is not interested in war. Egypt doesn't want a war. Turkey doesn't want a war. They don't want war. But they're prepared for war. And Egypt now, it led to, I'm not sure if, why people are not saying this. This is probably the biggest crisis between modern day Egypt and the American administration. A United States president inviting an Egyptian president to come to the White House, and an Egyptian president rejecting, regardless of your view of him, outright rejecting. That's an unprecedented move. The tensions are beyond any imaginations. So everything can happen, really. there are different likelihoods, but the possibility, the prospect, it's definitely there. And I would not be surprised if there is intense coordination. I mean, there's public coordination, right? The senior figures of Egypt, which led to the Egyptian president met with the Iranian president. The Egyptian military figures met with the Iranian figures. Hell, the Saudi military delegations were with Iran. Turkey with Iran. All of these things happen. All of these coordinations and meetings, they happened. And all of that, what does that say? That says that if things do escalate to that level, well, they're going to have to. Now, it's a case of delaying such a thing or potentially ruling it out. They don't want to have to go into war, like Egypt, for example. But on the ground, I believe they are prepared for it very much. Israel admits that they're prepared for it. Likewise with other fronts too. And again, if we want to talk about Lebanon, right, and Hezbollah, despite the fact that there are talks about, giving time for the state to try and diplomatically expel Israel and what have you, there's still a state that faced all of this before. They faced occupation before, and they had resistance, and they still have power. And despite the dramatic changes in Syria, things are still happening. Coordinations are still happening between Syria and between Lebanon. And Israel is doing everyone a favor now. They are showing all of the countries in the region that we're the problem. And the United States administration, they're also showing the countries in the region that, number one, yeah, that's our problem. Number two, I'll ditch you in any given moment. Literally ditch you. And, they're not that stupid. They have to be prepared. And also, Joseph, thank you for your support. And who else? Joseph and Donna and MCFC, thank you so much again, my friend. I really, really appreciate it. And Eric, Andrea, and Glenn Hoxley, and John. John, you said, who exactly is Trump meeting with that's hostile to Netanyahu right now? Well, the families of the prisoners of war in Israel, they are very hostile to Benjamin Netanyahu. These people call him a murderer. The mother of Matan Tsengauker, I'm not sure if Trump included her directly, by the way, because the report said that he's going to be meeting with some of those who were released, and some other reports said that he's going to be meeting with some of the family. This woman calls Netanyahu a killer. She blames him for killing the Israelis inside of Gaza. So that's problematic. That's problematic. Johan Bijou George, what do you think about Netanyahu's statement regarding protecting Druze in Jaramana, Damascus? Well, compare that to what he's doing with the minorities in occupied Palestine, right? Benjamin Netanyahu has a state called Israel. They have a minority of the original indigenous people called Palestinians. He massacred over 60,000 in the past year and a half. So much for protecting minorities, or Israel protecting minorities. It's a desperate attempt from Israel that isn't, that does not actually mean that there is no risk, okay? So there is risk. What's the risk? Firstly, Israel wants to portray this image that we are in control and we're threatening. The Syrian administration, the new Syrian administration, whether they're preparing for something against Israel or not, that's in the realm of the unknown. Their statement said they don't want war. So are they preparing? Is it all, we don't know. Their moves so far led to Israel translating all of that as signs of weaknesses. On the ground, despite the Israeli calls to protect some of the Druze community inside of Syria, the administration in Syria are continuing their plans. For example, Jaramana, the forces of the government are in Jaramana, and also they are being welcomed by the population. And let me share a video with you to show that. This was just several hours back, okay, today. So let's see this video here. That is, okay. Hold on a second. So look at this video. These are the Druze in Jaraman. Okay? Netanyahu saying I have to protect them. They're cheering for the government forces coming in Jaraman. Why and what happened? So let me tell you what happened so you can understand. Well, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to play on the side of minorities, especially with the Druze. Although the Druze community, it's not like you can be conclusive about the Druze community. Yes, they succeeded in having deals with their spiritual leaders in historical Palestine that led to conscription, which is similar to the Jewish people inside of Israel. And they participate in the army, but there are still voices who are against that from within. And there is fierce resistance from the Druze of the Golan Heights that have been occupied for over 50 years. And many statements that are coming from spiritual leaders in Syria are refusing all of this, saying we're Syrians. And historically, the Druze population in Syria, they were like other Syrians too. They fought for their independence. They fought against French attempts to divide Syria. The French at the time, I mean, in the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, they tried to have a small Alawite state and divide Syria based on different kind of sects. The Druze were one of the communities that opposed that, by the way. Now, does it mean that all of them are like that? And no, there are exclusions. There are exclusions. Israel just injected 3 million to the Druze community, or some people within the community, and so they published that in Israel. There was a warning coming from a man called Walid Jumblat, who is the most senior Druze politician in Lebanon, and he had a press conference this evening only for the purpose of warning from an Israeli hellish plan in Syria to support, anyone from within the Druze community who's willing to play ball with Israel. Clearly, there are few who might be able or might want to do that, like some might exist from other communities too. So the most important thing is to not get dragged into a sectarian tone, because that's what the enemies want. And this proves that no, the actual Druze population, they are in Syria. No, they are very supportive of a united Syria. They want their state to be one. And here they're supporting the government forces inside Jaramana, where this whole chaos started. And how did it start, by the way? There were armed groups inside of this location that, according to some in the community, were unknown, and they were hiding, and they started attacks and what have you. Now, the state is actually starting to implement things on the ground, despite of Israeli threats and anyone threatening, by the way. They told everyone all of the arms will be in the hands of the state. It doesn't matter where you are. And they were going with their armed forces in Jaramana, and there was a clash with one of these groups, to a level where the spiritual leaders in Jaramana said, no, here are the criminals, come and take them, because they killed one of the government forces. Again, this debunks the whole, doom and gloom prophets online who are telling you about this, all of the sectarian war in Syria and what have you. It doesn't exist, and the enemies of the Syrians are those who want that, and that's where people shouldn't fall for it. Now, does this mean that the threat is gone? No, the threat is not gone. Israel is in Syria. Israel is occupying Syrian territories. Again, did the new Syrian administration that's it, is selling out Syria to Israel? Did they allow them to go in and to keep them there? The statements are saying no, they have to retreat. And the more time goes by, the Syrian foreign minister, he just said a couple of days ago that no, Israel shouldn't just withdraw from Syrian territory, they should withdraw from the Golan Heights, because the Golan Heights are occupied. That's being met with Israeli arrogance and with Israeli threats. And we also need to understand why is Netanyahu choosing to have these escalations too. It's also to run away from the humiliation and defeat in Gaza. Netanyahu started to escalate in Lebanon, the full-blown Lebanon war, with Lebanon moving from a front to a country that is participant in a war. All of that escalation happened when the streets were at a boiling point against Benjamin Netanyahu, and there were talks already about just overthrowing Netanyahu, because you start to have record numbers of people protesting, get a deal, get it over and done with, we can't wait any longer, you're lying, and they're dying. He went on a full-scale war with Lebanon. He diffused some of the tensions, and the protests indeed got down, because all of a sudden we were at a front with Lebanon, only for him to reach a temporary ceasefire within 2 months in Lebanon to justify the ceasefire that would happen in Gaza after that, slowly climb down the tree without appearing to be climbing down the tree. And he's also having these escalations with Syria. Does that mean that he actually is doing that only for Gaza? No, they have interests in Syria, they have interests in Jordan, they have interests in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia too, and in Iraq, by the way. Israel has a plan in Syria to not only capture parts of the south of Syria, they have plans to go from the south, stretching all the way to the borders with Jordan, down to SDF-controlled territories. But they're faced with American resistance here, because the United States is officially like on the way of getting out, and Turkey is just having a bigger offensive against SDF, although SDF started to have a change of tone, although Abdullah Öcalan, who is the leader, the main leader of the primarily Kurdish armed movements, just said, no, that's it, we need to take down the arms, and we need a peaceful resolution. Turkey is not relying on that. Likewise with Syria, they're keen on having all of Syria united in one front. The Syrian president, Ashara, he was in Latakia and Tartus, who are considered to be hubs of the previous regime, and he was welcomed with masses, like thousands, more than these people, thousands of people cheering him and supporting him in these areas too, again debunking the narrative that some are pushing for. But now he's also facing Israel. Are they preparing, or is it going to be a new reality? Well, fact of the matter is, Israel is occupying Syrian territories. Apart from the Golan Heights, they're occupying more Syrian territories. The visibly weak response coming from the Syrian administration is leaving a lot of doubt. It's casting doubt as if, what are your genuine interests? However, what we do need to know is, we're just 2 or 3 months in all of this. Are things going to escalate? Is something going to happen? What's Turkey going to do in the background? There's a big talk about that. What is Russia going to do? The new administration is talking both with Russia and Turkey. And on the ground, they are still going ahead despite the threats of Israel. Like with these scenes, what did Israel say? Benjamin Netanyahu, actually. He said, any attack on our Druze brothers and sisters, acting like, the Druze are all one and they all love Netanyahu, like some of those sellouts inside of Israel who sold their whole communities to go and die for this genocidal entity. He said, we're going to crack down if they touch them. Well, they're there and they're being celebrated and supported. And the government in Syria, the administration in Syria, is having a united approach. I mean, the dialogue, the conference of dialogue, they had everyone represented, all minorities in Syria, a Christian, and Ashar himself saying, we come from different backgrounds, so we want to focus on rebuilding Syria together, presentation, feedback, what have you. All of that was still early days. However, there's a big problem, and that big problem is Israel. How is the new administration going to deal with them, and what kind of way forward are they projecting? All of that is going to come in the near weeks or months. Eventually we're going to see the reality of everything, right? Whether you support or are against. What we try and do here is analyze based on the information that's given on the ground inside of Syria. And thank you for that. Let's go to your next question. Just take a couple of more. TMZBG, Turkey used to be very vocal about Gaza, but I haven't heard much from them recently. Have they said anything new in support of Gaza? Well, their support of Gaza is clear. I mean, Turkey, in terms of statements, in terms of supporting the rights of the Palestinians to resist, supporting them in aid, getting all of that they have. The levels of statements did not exactly match the levels of action in Gaza. And what I mean by that is some statements that came from the Turkish president spoke about military intervention. We haven't heard about military. And although, almost a year ago, Gaza is from us, the Ottoman Empire, we were there. We can invade you like we invaded Libya. Several days back, he said about the Israeli army, he said, they have been humiliated basically by these people inside of Gaza. Wait up until they are faced with a real army. They will be ripped piece by piece. Again, talks, but there is no imminent thing. However, the changes in Syria are what escalated everything between Israel and Turkey. So Israel wasn't worried about the statements. They weren't worried about the statements of Erdogan. They became more worried, and not just worried, they started to take a concrete action to counter the Turkish influence inside of Syria, because they know that Turkey backed the armed opposition, and now the armed opposition is in power. And the first country that the new government inside of Syria will have a very solid agreement with is Turkey. That's the biggest likelihood. They're already establishing themselves slowly inside of Syria, and they're arming the new Syrian army. It hasn't reached a stage of, wow, but Turkey is arguably the strongest, I believe, military in the West Asian region. I mean, close with Egypt, but Turkey probably has a slight edge. Both Turkey and Egypt are extremely strong. And now with the situation in Syria, the way that Israel views it is, we had no border with Turkey. There was no problem. It's not as if, Turkey was about to send fighter jets to go and attack Israel. Israel, they have defenses and they have fighter jets. They can counter Turkish fighter jets. The potential was something from the ground, something happened. Well, now there's a new administration in Syria, massively backed by Turkey. That means I'm facing an enemy that was further away. And now, they're potentially on my borders. This was why, one of the main reasons that Israel started to expand, and they occupied the demilitarized zone of the UNDOF, the UN forces, and they started to have certain expansions inside of Syrian territory. Their government is re-evaluating the level of risk that Turkey poses on them, and they also are reevaluating the position of Turkey as a country. Like, are they an enemy? Are they a state that is hostile? What are they exactly? Many people in Israel, I mean, senior analysts and those in the political and military establishments are warning from that. However, we need to remember that Turkey traditionally, in any escalation with Israel, it never reached a case of full-blown war. Does that mean it will not? No, it could happen, but it depends on how much progress they will have, particularly inside of Syria. Turkey already made statements against the Israeli presence inside of Syria, like as the new Syrian administration too. And despite the Israeli threats, the new administration is still going ahead with talks, with armed presence in those parts that Israel is saying, oh no, you can't be there anyway. And also we need to understand and contextualize Netanyahu's actions and escalations based on the other fronts. We can't like say, oh, that's it, Syria, they're only interested. No, you need to know, why they escalate and how is that linked to Gaza, and how he can potentially justify going into phase 2 by saying, there's a more pressing thing here and we need to temporarily get that over and done with, so that, Smotrich will tell him, oh yeah, okay, maybe this time I'll agree with you, but we need to still continue with that. And, because Smotrich, for example, who is a main contributor in the Netanyahu government, to him, Syria is important too. So Netanyahu could have this argument with him. The borders of Jerusalem reach Damascus, Smotrich used to say. So we need to understand all of that, contextualize it, and also understand that certain things will take time. You wouldn't see like everything all at once. And Arnab, you're saying he gave Ahmed al-Shara 50 F-16 jets. He did not outright give it to him. These are, unless I'm wrong, but 50 actually are in Syria in what was labeled as a protection for Syrian airspace. Now, again, is that restricted to the north? Is he going to do something with Israel with them? That's a different question. And it might be accurate that they are willing to, train slowly the Syrians for them to use them, because, they need to train them to use F-16s at the end of the day, and later on start rebuilding the Syrian army. And thank you for that. They said that they will temporarily help them with the airspace and air defenses. Jimmy Eyes Mahmoud, off topic, but do you think Zelensky, oh no, not off topic, we talk about him and China, may see if China will broker and negotiate a ceasefire with Russia in exchange for minerals to walk away from the US. That is actually really interesting, because he was supposed to sign a mineral agreement with Trump in the White House, only for Trump to kick him out after this humiliating confrontation he had with him without a signature. And after such humiliation, it might actually be an option. I mean, China, they're already controlling so many precious minerals and metals, and the United States is bothered by that. Anything to do with lithium and what have you. And he can, that's actually a possibility. However, potentially not that quickly. Like, I'm not sure that Zelensky, who was basing his whole campaign against Russia primarily on US support, will all of a sudden take a hostile approach with the US. No. I think he will try and resolve this as much as possible. He will try and lobby with some of his European partners who said, no, we support you, we're with you, for him to have a deal. Maybe he'll backtrack and then have a deal. And it also depends on the money. I mean, I'm sure the Chinese have money. It's not that they don't have money, but it will be viewed as something very severe. And at the end of the day, really, they were pushed into this Zelensky himself. I mean, some of the things that that Vance and Trump told him were actually correct. Like what Vance told him about forced conscription and grabbing people from the streets and millions dead, that's true. Propaganda tours, that's true. But why were you so quiet with Netanyahu? Why didn't you say about forced conscription in Israel and imprisoning people who object to joining the Israeli army? Why don't you say, what's it called, hasbara, or propaganda tours to the tours that Israel used to take people, including Elon Musk himself, who's in the administration, to the areas surrounding Gaza, showing them like cots with bullets, saying, oh, you know, this is where the babies were killed, without providing any evidence. So I think he will probably give it time before he, you know, goes with China. But listen, everyone knows China's an option. Like, doesn't the United States know that China's the option for Saudi Arabia and for Egypt too? Palatel is saying, do you think that Julani isn't doing something against Israel because he knows his country is destroyed and weak, and that if Syria recovers, he could get more aggressive to Israel? I mean, in theory, yes. In theory, they are weak. In theory, they need to recover and rebuild. You know, parts of Syria are like 200 Gazas. This is what people need to know. Over 1 million people killed, 10 million refugees, destruction, the whole military is destroyed. What are they going to do? That's one argument. Second argument is, well, every resistance against Israel, if you decide that this is what you want to do now, hasn't been in equal measures, right? We saw what the Palestinians did with limited resources, and they didn't take that as an excuse. If that's what you intend now, well, is he intending that now? No, by his current statements. Does Palestine and Al-Aqsa mean something to him? With previous statements, yes, he did say that the main aim is to liberate Al-Aqsa several years back. And that video is circulating online. You can see him. And he also said that he was inspired by the Palestinian uprising, and this motivated him. Of course, then the Iraq war and what have you. However, we judge by actions, by the statements and actions. The statements are getting more hostile. The actions, well, on the ground, they're still expanding with areas that, even areas that Israel is telling them no. There are more talks about formations of armed resistance groups operating inside of Syria or in formation. Israel confirmed that their forces in Syria were faced with an attack about 2-3 weeks ago. And again, we'll see how it goes. And then we'll judge. Will Israel withdraw with this diplomacy? It would be a success, wouldn't it? Traditionally, we didn't see that. Or will Israel use this presence as leverage to, you know, to blackmail them as much as possible, or tell them, look, I'm not going to withdraw unless you confirm you're not going to be armed to the south of Damascus or what have you? We'll see. We'll see. Tory agrees, Mahmoud, if there's an election in Israel, is there any chance for a less extreme government? Any hope of peace of Israel is more real diplomacy. I think that the most extreme government in the history of Israel is this government. And it's very difficult to imagine that happening again. Now, saying that, you're talking about Israel. You know, what's right and left in Israel and center, right? You have extreme, and moderate extreme. Everything is extreme, because you're talking about an entity founded and established on the concept of Zionism, ethnic cleansing and racial and religious supremacy that justifies massacres. Like Israel as a state is a problem. Its actions, its inception. Israel as a state allowed Netanyahu to do what he does. We need to remember that. However, many view that as not the way that Benjamin Netanyahu should have operated necessarily. Not by having a problem with the concept of genocide, no, but by saying that, it's not suitable at that scale with this much problem, with that many problems. Now, it would be less than Netanyahu, I believe. If a government comes, it will be less extreme than the Netanyahu government. And don't forget, Netanyahu is a psychopath too. Any hope that peace for Israel is more real diplomacy? Israel has the power to have peace, but it chooses not to have peace because it wasn't founded on having peace. And those who supported its foundation will never accept the concept of this entity that they put there as a reason to wreak havoc and control and suppress any sort of revival in North African and West Asian nations, the Arab world primarily. They will not all of a sudden say, oh yeah, Israel, go ahead and have some peace. They will support something called the Abraham Accords, peace over the Palestinian cause, without addressing any of the core problems that Israel was founded on. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the displacement, the mass murder, the inequality, the injustice, and the regime of apartheid and racial and religious supremacy. So that's how they were founded. They can, but I don't believe they will choose to. Netanyahu is not choosing that. As a matter of fact, many of his opponents choose not to. If you listen to Yair Lapid, even the opposition leader, he isn't interested in a Palestinian state whatsoever. Okay. And I'll take the last one from Splatter. Do you think Netanyahu is quietly threatening Trump with his golden pager gift? Such a strange gift. It is a very strange gift. He actually handed him a golden pager and a normal pager. Firstly, look what it symbolizes. Two sadistic men leading sadistic administrations who celebrate acts of mass terror that cost the lives of innocent children. The pager attacks. They blinded children. They killed children in Lebanon. And they celebrate that. Look how sick they are. You're talking about sick people, very, very sick and sadistic. And so the golden one is to kind of celebrate this mass terror attack in Lebanon. That was so underplayed globally, by the way. Didn't you realize that Israel can get away with acts of mass terror with equipment that is distributed to the public? It didn't raise alarm bells. No sudden talks about ban this state is sponsoring and conducting terror and this and that. No. Because it's their little project. But he also gave him another pager. As in, what? Is it a real pager? Is it gonna explode in Trump? Clearly a message, sick, ugly. Okay, we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Thank you for all of your participation and questions, very substantial questions and interesting. Sorry, we got this. We added this by accident. Okay. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. In the meantime, I wish you all a lovely weekend. And before I leave, thank you again for everyone who sent supers, much appreciated. And that would be, okay. MCFC, thank you so much. The Virus, and John Hagar, Glenn Hoxley, Eric, Andrea, Donna, Alan, MCFC again, and triple thank you so much. Just Pudding and Solid. Thank you very much, guys. In the meantime, I wish you all a lovely week ahead. If you're fasting, I hope it's easy on you and that it's accepted as well. And I'll hopefully be with you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone, and take care.